Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today, and tomorrow, we are going to be talking about markets. I know what a market is. But did you know that there are different kinds of market? And if you see them after these 2 days, you'll be able not only to describe them, but to tell the difference between dry market and wet market. So, listen carefully and learn something new with us.
And what's the title of our article?
Oh, it is Wet Markets, a one-stop shop for the freshest food around.
好，那我们的中文标题是吃货必逛，你要的新鲜都在这。那这 wet markets 就是所谓的传统市场，其实就是所谓的菜市场。那各位要注意这个重音在前面啊 ，wet markets 不是 wet market，wet markets 是湿的市场啊。好，所以意思不一样，所以 wet markets
Although they are wet.
yeah， 虽然说它是湿的，但是它重点是这是一种市场，所以那个 wet 是一种 category， 所以 wet markets。然后呢，后面呢，他说 a one-stop shop， 那英文常见的一个语块 ，one stop 就是你只要在这个地方停留一次就可以了，因为在这个地方可以满足你各种相关的需求，所以你只要再来一次就好了，你不用说你要的 A 东西还要跑到 B 这个地点去买你要的 B 东西， C 地点去买你要的 C 东西，不需要，你在这里 one stop 就可以买齐你所需要的东西，叫做 a one-stop shop。for the freshest food around， 最新鲜的食物 around 就是附近的，所以附近最新鲜的食物你只要到这个地方统统买齐了。
I want to say that wet markets is really an English word that came from Singapore to describe what people call these markets. But honestly, I think a closer version of that would be calling them farmers markets, because a lot of these market stalls are directly farm to table. I mean, a lot of them are also from like vegetable wholesalers that people buy from in order to retail level sell, but a lot of them are direct farmers directly representing their produce.
In Syracuse, New York, we have a farmer's market. Nobody uses dry or wet.
Right,
You're
exactly.
either supermarket or farmer's market.
Yeah, exactly. Supermarket versus farmer's market versus dry or wet market.
所以呢，这个其实当然 wet markets 我们文章里面有提到，这是新加坡人发明的。那其实在美国呢，最接近所谓的 wet market 的地方呢，他们就称为farmers market， 那就是农夫把他们的这个带生产东西直接带到这个市场来卖。那各位注意到这个重音啊，这个 farmers market， 刚刚的 Bruce 跟 Angela 都是这样讲，你也可以说 farmers market， 可真的感觉起来是农夫的拥有的一个市场。
It's a place where you buy farmers.
Yeah. 所以各位注意，虽然说这是所有格，它变成是形容词，是 farmers， 但是它一样，它重音在前面 farmers market。Okay,
let's look at day one. This is a 2-day lesson. I'll read through the whole day one article. There are many different kinds of markets in the world. In developed areas, people are most likely familiar with supermarkets or hypermarkets. In less developed rural areas, traditional markets are more common. These can be divided into 2 categories, dry markets and wet markets or fresh markets. Dry markets sell dry items, which are non-perishable goods such as clothing, crafts, kitchenware, toys, or electronics. On the other hand, wet markets sell perishable goods, which are fresh foods like fish, meat, fruits, and vegetables. Though some of the oldest markets in history were wet markets, the actual term didn't become common until the 1970s. The Singapore government coined the term to distinguish traditional markets from modern supermarkets. The word wet was chosen because ice and water are used to keep foods cool and fresh, making wet floors common at such markets. Wet markets differ from supermarkets in a few significant ways, even though both may offer similar products. First, supermarkets offer more products beyond food items, such as household cleaning supplies, baby products, pet essentials, medicine, and more. Second, supermarkets are operated by a single owner, so all sales go to one company. In contrast, the space of wet markets is divided into small stalls that are rented by individual vendors. customers need to pay for items from each vendor separately. This also means that prices, the quality of products, and standards of cleanliness can vary from vendor to vendor. A final difference is that the prices are not fixed, and sellers are open to bargaining at wet markets. These days, different kinds of markets are popular in different areas of the world. In some places, traditional outdoor, open-air markets are still very common. However, in urban areas, indoor wet markets located in giant metal or concrete structures are becoming the trend. Enclosed wet markets are usually considered more sanitary than outdoor wet markets.
Okay, so there are many different kinds of markets in the world. That is the most general statement you can make about markets in the history of general statements.
好，所以呢，这个世界上有很多种不同的市场。
In developed areas, people are most likely familiar with supermarkets or hypermarkets. Now, developed areas, you can think rich and highly developed countries.
Or you can just think about built-up areas where there's like a lot of tall buildings and a high concentration of people are also more likely to have these kinds of big box stores.
And the reason is, if you have just one supermarket or one even larger hypermarket, it'll be too crowded. So with these very large markets, it becomes more convenient for people who are busy in these highly developed areas to go shopping.
好，所以 in developed areas 就在已经开发或者已经发展的地区，这个比较进步的，所谓比较进步啦，不一定叫进步，就比较发展的地区呢，人们 are most likely 很可能 most probably familiar with， 所以人们大概最可能很熟悉的是什么呢？是 supermarkets 超级市场超市，或者是 hypermarkets 或者是大卖场，那重音都在前面 supermarket 或者是 hypermarkets。
And then our author says that in less developed rural areas where it's more spread out and more countryside, traditional markets are more common. And I would say that I guess this is generally true, and then there's Taiwan, in which we have supermarkets and hypermarkets in all places, regardless of the level of development, because different people like to buy different things.
那这个当然只是个一般的说法了。他说在 less developed 没有那么发展的 rural areas 乡村地区 rural 就是乡村地区，在这些比较没有那么发达的乡村地区呢 traditional markets 就是传统市场 are more common 比较常见。
These can be divided into two categories, dry markets and wet markets or fresh markets. And here we're talking about traditional markets. There are types of traditional markets, at least two, dry markets and wet markets. Sometimes these wet markets are also called fresh markets.
I think in Chinese they're called vegetable markets.
蔬果市场菜市场 yeah. 好，所以 these 就是指这些传统的市场呢，那可以被分成 can be divided into 这个 two categories 两类。那各位要注意到这个语块，就是 something can be divided into 多少个 categories， 就这个东西可以分成几类。那在这里它是分成两类，一种就是干货市场 dry markets， 一种是 wet markets 叫菜市场，那或者是这个 fresh markets 就是新鲜 fresh 是新鲜的意思，在这里只是鲜货市场 fresh markets。
So dry markets sell dry items. We put dry in quotes because it's not really about them being wet. You wouldn't get most of these things wet. It's just that they're not dripping with ice water. And so the dry items, these so-called dry items, are non-perishable goods. A good is a product. Non-perishable means it cannot spoil. So like a piece of clothing. A piece of clothing won't spoil. It will last a long, long time. You can leave it sitting for years and it will be fine. It will go out of fashion, but it will still be a perfectly good shirt. So it's a non-perishable good. It won't rot and become garbage in 3 days. And so these things are like clothing, crafts. Crafts are like handmade items like baskets and whatnot. Kitchenware, toys, or electronics.
好，所以呢，这个 dry markets 干货市场卖的就是所谓的干的 dried items 就是商品的品项，那当然就是指的是货物。那 which 就是所谓的 干货，这个 dry items， 它们是 non-perishable goods。perishable 它的动词是 perish， P-E-R-I-S-H。perish 就是 to be destroyed or die， 或者 to rot R-O-T， 或者是刚刚这个 Angela 讲的 to spoil S-P-O-I-L。那 rot 就是腐烂， spoil 就是坏掉，东西坏掉。所以 non-perishable 就是不会腐败的，不会坏的这些 goods 商品。例如什么呢？例如 clothing 衣服， crafts 就是工艺品，还有呢 kitchenware 就是这个厨房用具，就是 utensils 这个厨房用的一些东西 U-T-E-N-S-I-L-S， 像这个 pots pans 这个都是厨房用的东西，就是 kitchenware 就是厨房用具。那还有包括玩具也是所谓的干货，还有呢 electronics 电子产品当然也是干货。
On the other hand, wet markets sell perishable goods, which are fresh foods like fish, meat, fruits, and vegetables. On the other hand, helps us make a difference in our minds between a dry market and a wet market. The wet market is famous for food that is going to be prepared for meals. So you buy fresh fish, you buy fresh vegetables, and so on.
好，所以 on the other hand， 另一方面呢，这 wet markets 就是所谓的菜市场呢，它卖的是 perishable， 刚刚 non-perishable 是不会坏的，那 perishable 就是会坏的，会腐败的这种商品 which are 就是指所谓的这个 perishable goods 就是怎么样，是 fresh foods 就是新鲜的食物，例如说 fish 鱼， meat 肉， fruits 水果，还有 vegetables 蔬菜。
Though some of the oldest markets in history were wet markets, the actual term didn't become common until the 1970s. So this term wet market was actually invented in the 1970s. It began being used in the 1970s.
好，所以虽然呢，这个历史上最老的一些市场里面，大概都是所谓的 wet markets， 因为这个历史上大家反正人类嘛，这个最早有的市场大概多半很多大概都是所谓的 wet markets。虽然是这样子，但是呢 the actual term 这个实际上 wet markets 这种说法叫做 the actual term， 实际上这个说法呢 didn't become common， 并没有成为普遍的，一直要到1970年代。换句话说，一直要到1970年代，这个 wet markets 这个 term 才变得比较普遍。
The Singapore government coined the term to distinguish traditional markets from modern supermarkets. Remember, at the time, market was just a market, and people didn't think of them as different. They all sold things that you needed in one way or another. But the Singapore government coined the term. They created or invented this term, if you like, so that modern supermarkets would be distinguished from traditional markets.Until the 1970s, there weren't many supermarkets, but as they became more common and more people used them, people wanted to distinguish one from the other because they don't both sell exactly the same things.
所以呢，是新加坡的政府 coined the term. Coin 在这里是动词，它专门指创造或者发明某一个字词，所以他们发明的这个说法 coined the term， 新加坡政府发明的这个说法，目的是要 to distinguish， 为了要区分 traditional markets， 就是传统的市场 from modern supermarkets， 现代的超市，所以 to distinguish A from B， 就是要把 A 跟 B 区分出来。
The word wet was chosen for this name because ice and water are used to keep foods cool and fresh,making wet floors common at such markets. So at these markets, people are using ice and water to keep the stuff on display fresh. And so, of course, the water will drip onto the floor and the floor will become wet. I also think the reason they chose the word wet was because traditional is 4 syllables and wet is just 1. So traditional market is like 6 syllables and wet market is only 3. So it's faster and easier to say.
所以这个wet markets 这个比较简单明了哈，你说 traditional markets 哈，多好几个音节。好，我们来看看这个句子，他说 the word wet 这个字 was chosen 被选择了，为什么呢？因为 ice 冰跟 water 水被用来干嘛？ keep foods cool and fresh 保持食物冰凉跟新鲜。 keep 它的受词是 foods， 然后 cool and fresh 是受词补语，就是 受持这个 foods 的状态，所以保持食物在 cool and fresh 的状态之下，那就造成了 making， 因为用水跟这个冰来保持食物的新鲜，所以造成了 wet floors 潮湿的地面。那让潮湿的地面怎么样呢？一样同样的句型 make 后面受词是 wet floors， 那受词补语是 common， 就是很常见，所以使得潮湿的地面变得很常见， common 是修饰那个 wet floors， 所以使得潮湿地面很常见 at such markets， 在这样的市场里面很常看到潮湿的地面，所以他们就选了 wet 这个字来形成 wet markets 这样的一个名词。
Okay, our next paragraph.Wet markets differ from supermarkets in a few significant ways. Significant here means important and clear, even though both may offer similar products. As we mentioned earlier, it's possible to find one thing at both markets.
好，所以 wet markets 就是菜市场。那各位后面有一个很棒的、很常见的一个语块，大家把它学起来。这个 A differ from B.In a few significant ways， 就是 A 跟 B 在几个很重要的地方是不同的，叫做 A differ from B in a few significant ways。 这里的 A 就是 wet markets， 所以菜市场跟什么不同呢？跟 supermarkets 跟这个超市在几个重要的地方 significant， 在几个重要的方面是很不同的 differ。 那虽然怎么样 even though both may， 虽然说两个都可以 offer， 都可能会这个提供 similar products， 他们可能卖的商品可能是很像的，但是呢，菜市场跟超市在很多地方是不同的。
First, supermarkets offer more products beyond food items, such as household cleaning supplies, baby products, pet essentials, medicine, and more. They also offer you a lot of junk food. Like, there's so much junk food at supermarkets that aren't really at, traditional markets.
好，首先呢，超市 offer 他们提供 more products 更多的商品，怎么样的更多的商品呢？ Beyond 除了这个食品项目、食物项目之外呢，超市他们提供更多的商品，例如什么呢？ Household cleaning supplies 就在家里面的清洁用品 cleaning supplies， supplies 在这里就是用品，各种用品，所以在家里面的家庭清洁用品household cleaning supplies， 还有呢 baby products 就是婴儿的产品，然后呢还有 pet essentials 就是宠物的必需品，也就是这个宠物的罐头啊、猫砂啊等等的叫 pet essentials， 还有 medicine 还有药品，他们也可以买到维他命啊什么的 and more 还有很多。
Second, supermarkets are operated by a single owner, so all sales go to one company. This is typical of large supermarkets, and there may be 2 or 3 supermarkets with the same name because they're owned by the same company.
好，然后呢，第二点，超市 are operated by， 他们由谁来营运，由谁来经营呢？ They are run by, R-U-N, they are run by a single owner， 有一个单一的老板、单一的拥有者来拥有的、来经营的。所以呢 all sales 所有的销售额 go to one company， 都会去到，都归一家公司所有，因为它就是这家超市，它老板就是一个。
In contrast, the space of wet markets is divided into small stalls. A stall or a stand is basically an open air area that's just been roped off and got a few tables in it. So a stall is just basically a bunch of tables in a space. And these stalls are rented by individual vendors. And they also may be owned by individual people. So like the stall that I'm renting might be different than have a different owner than the stall that, for instance, Wesley is renting. So it's a lot more granular. There's a lot more individual interests as opposed to one uniform company. And another thing that's not brought up in the article is that supermarkets tend to be highly packaged, whereas at wet markets or traditional markets, you can literally bring your own bags and have them or containers and have them put the food in there. So it's a lot more 环保.
Yeah. 所以当然这个 Angela 是讲的，除了这里提出来之外呢，另外一个差别是超市的东西通常都这个包装都很多，所以比较也没那么环保。那么来看这个句子，他说呢，这个 in contrast 相比之下 the space of wet markets 就是菜市场它的空间呢 is divided into 被区分被切割成为 small stalls 小的摊位 stall 就是摊位，那这种小的摊位 that 就指这些 small stalls，这些小摊位呢 are rented 被租用 by individual 被个别的 vendors 摊贩所租用， vendors 就是摊贩，所以菜市场呢，它的空间是被区分成为一些小摊位，然后呢，有个别的摊贩来租用这些小摊位，而且这些小摊位的拥有者可能也不是同一个人。
Customers need to pay for items from each vendor separately. So you go to the fish guy and you buy your fish, and then you waltz over to the fresh vegetable stand, and you can buy the vegetables that you want or need, and then to another place that sells fruit, and each one will have its own owner.
然后呢，这个顾客必须要 pay for items， 为他们所买的东西付钱。好 ，items 就是商品 ，pay for 就是付钱。那这些商品呢是怎么样？是来自于 each vendor， 来自于每一个不同的这个摊贩 ，separately 就是分开的。所以你不是说超市你可以所有东西最后在一起付账，那但在传统市场呢，你就是每一个摊贩买完东西，你就要付钱给这个摊贩，所以是分开来付账的。
This also means that prices, the quality of products, and standards of cleanliness, all three of these things, can vary from vendor to vendor. So that means the prices can be different, the quality of what you're buying can be different, and how clean it is can be different depending on the vendor.
好 ，this also means that 这也表示 prices 价格，还有呢 the quality of products 商品的品质，还有 standards of cleanliness 它清洁的标准。这个 cleanliness 不是 cleanliness， 是 cleanliness 啊，那个是 clean 的声音。所以它的清洁度呢都怎么样 ？can vary 就是会改变 from vendor to vendor。Something can vary from A to 通常这个是重复的 from A to A， 好，就是 A 跟 A 不同类的东西之间会有区别，所以这个 vary from vendor to vendor 就是从这个小贩到另外一个小贩之间呢会有差别的。
A final difference is that the prices are not fixed, and sellers are open to bargaining at wet markets. So if you need noodles and you go to one vendor, you can ask, how much do you sell this for? Then you can go sometimes right next door or to a different place in the same market.And, he's selling noodles too. Which one is cheaper? And maybe one looks much cleaner than the other one. So customers have more choice when they want to buy food.
好，那最后一个差别就是 the prices are not fixed. Fixed 就固定，所以价格不是固定的。然后 sellers， 而且呢，这些卖的人呢are open to 就是对什么开放，也就表示他们是可以接受的，他们可以接受 bargaining， 可以接受这个讨价还价 at wet markets， 在这个菜市场你可以跟摊贩讨价还价，那超市的话它标价就是标价，你没办法跟他讲可不可以算便宜一点。
These days, different kinds of markets are popular in different areas of the world. This is very similar to the very first sentence of this article, which is so general as to just be very like, okay, we're going to talk about markets kind of way.
Yeah, 这句话跟这个我们开头的那句话很像哈，就是这个现在呢，不同类型的市场在世界不同的地区受到大家的欢迎，好，所以每个地区都有大家喜欢的市场，就他那个地区喜欢的市场。
In some places, traditional outdoor open-air markets are still very common. And you would be surprised, maybe, if you go to Europe or the United States, you might think all the food and things that you need to buy are in supermarkets. Well, that could be, but they also have these traditional fresh markets.
Farmers markets.
Right.
Just about everywhere.
In my city, they're called farmers markets, and they're fun. The food is displayed.You can even establish a relationship with a seller if you're going to frequently buy what they are selling.
好，所以呢，在某些地方，传统的这种 outdoor 就是户外的 open air 露天的 markets are still very common， 仍然很常见。所以你到美国去的话，不一定只能去超市，美国也有很多这种所谓的 farmers market， 就是类似我们的菜市场一样。
However, in urban areas, indoor wet markets located in giant metal or concrete structures are becoming the trend. That's very true, but something I've noticed in Taipei is even when these wet markets are existing as like the city builds wet markets in the various places, I've noticed that the outside street leading up to this wet market is still the more like intensively buying and selling area of the market. I almost never go in, for instance, at Yongchuan Shichang, I almost never go into the actual market because everything I need is already outside. I kind of prefer the open air, even though it's inconvenient when it rains because I feel like the sunlight feels more sanitary than going into these dark concrete buildings. But, in other areas in the world, in Vietnam, for instance, concrete structures being with the wet markets are becoming the trend. It's true.
好，所以但是呢，在这个 urban 就都会 areas 的地区，在都会地区呢，这个室内的 indoor wet market 室内的传统市场，然后呢，怎么样呢？再继续修饰一下这个 indoor wet markets that are located in that are 省略掉了。那这些室内的传统市场是位于 giant 巨大的 metal 就是这个金属或者是 concrete 混凝土就是水泥的这种 structures。这种水泥建筑物里面的这种在巨大的水泥建筑物里面的这种室内传统市场呢 are becoming the trend 就是它正在成为趋势，就越来越受欢迎的意思。
Enclosed wet markets are usually considered more sanitary than outdoor wet markets.
好，所以 enclosed 就是封闭的，就在室内封闭的这种 wet markets are usually considered 通常被认为是 more sanitary 比较卫生，这个 sanitary 就是比较符合卫生的，跟什么比起来比较卫生呢？跟 outdoor 就是室外的 wet markets 比起来，这个是比较卫生的。
Okay, that's it for our day one, and we'll be back tomorrow to finish up our discussion of markets. Until then, bye-bye.